Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Happy New Year. Today we welcome Josh English from 6 Going on 7 to the podcast. Iodine Recordings is reissuing 6 Going on 7's sophomore record, Heartbreak's got Backbeat, on vinyl. Pre-orders are up now with the February ship date. Iodine also has copies of the band's debut, Self-Made Mess, still available, and at the time I'm recording this intro, it's on sale for $10. If you aren't familiar with the band, but like the late 90s, early 2000s deep elm emo scene, this is not a band to miss. Josh talks about growing up in Portland, following Will out to the East Coast to play music, the unfortunate ending of the band, connecting with Casey for the reissues, writing new music, and a lot more. There's a lot of amazing stories in this episode, and Josh was a delight to talk to. So enjoy the conversation, and make sure you check out 6 Going on 7 and support the work Casey's doing at Iodine. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of As the Story Grows. If you're brand new to the podcast, welcome. Thanks for listening. You can find links in our show notes or at asthestorygrows.com to our podcast community on Discord. You can sign up for our mailing list, or you can support the show financially and get early access to every episode on Patreon. And if you think somebody might enjoy this episode, I would love it if you would share it with them. You can always leave a comment on the episode, a review on Apple, a comment on YouTube, or you can shoot me an email asthestorygrows@gmail.com. I would love to read it on the podcast. Enjoy getting to know Josh English from 6 Going on 7.
I'm in Oregon. Where I grew up.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Portland, Oregon, USA.
Nice. What was growing up like?
I mean, normal. I'm trying to think, like what was relevant. My mom, music teacher, single mom, music teacher. Grew up with some sisters.
Okay.
I got super into music early on, primarily radio, and then just going to. There was a record store down the street that was renamed multiple times over the trajectory of its existence, but it was called Everybody's Record Tapes and Video, which should give you some context for the era. And it's primarily like one side of it was like a head shop. It was like black light posters and bombs, this and that. And the other half was like video rental store, CDs, cassettes, everything. Yeah. But I was obsessed with the little money that I got to spend. Nice. Spending a lot, poor choices and good choices. Full disclosure, but it was That was. Go ahead.
No, yeah. That's just the way it is growing up, right?
Right.
Yeah. Is Portland as weird as it's caricatured to be?
I mean, I think it's a great city. I think it has its peaks and valleys, like everything. I think it's had a very it's got a long history of sort of, like counterculture figures, for lack of a better generalization, and it's like you figure it's sandwiched between San Francisco's your next real major city to the south and Seattle to the north, before you get to Vancouver. And those are not close, but I just mean if you're trying to get big chunks, if you look at like tour stops for larger acts, it's very often like San Francisco or Bay Area, Portland, Seattle and or Vancouver, or both, depending. But when I was growing up, I felt like it was often passed over. It's definitely more of a primary market now than it was then, I think. Mm-hmm. But having said that, like it was kind of perfect place to germinate. Just smaller, weird bands. Okay. And a lot of great punk bands that influenced a lot of people, like early on, Poison Idea, that sort of thing. And then in my era of going to shows early on, it was like Heat Miser, Elliott Smith's band,
Yeah.
30-06, who I loved. A lot of early sub pop bands that got signed from Portland, Seattle, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the many incarnations of Poison Idea that just kept going. It was just like one original member and Jerry A and whoever played with him at the moment.
Yeah. That's cool. At what point did you pick up an instrument? Was bass that first instrument?
It wasn't. I just was talking to somebody the other day, but my mom's a music teacher. So my first thing was like when I was not really little, but pretty little, she was like piano or violin. And so those were my two poles.
Gotcha.
And I had no context. I don't even know if I knew I wanted to play anything, So I ended up playing violin, which is fine. And I played it for like 13, 14 years.
Yeah.
That was my first instrument. And I was really, really bad at reading music then, and still not my strong suit. It felt a little too like mathy for me for like the way my brain works. I can like hobble my way through sheet music. Or I could then, I don't know. I haven't had to, I've been blessed with being surrounded by people that have aptitude in that area. I worked with this drummer, Charlie, on a lot of solo records, who I love, who's a great percussionist, but he's also like great music theory. And I would play something and I would be like, he'd be working out like a keyboard part. And he'd, kind of listen and chart it out. Okay, what's that chord? It's a, flat 5, this and that. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you're here because I have no idea. I'm just like, let me show you this. Here are my fingers. What does that look like? Outside of like the basic things. So but I have a really good ear. So I was able to pick up things. So I started trying to replicate things I heard on, things that I owned, like music that was in the house or music I heard on the radio or music that I purchased, like any of those three things.
Yeah.
And so at some point I got a guitar that was a loaner. I didn't own one and I was really bad. And really enjoyed just figuring out. It was such like a win to figure out these like little things, these little songs. So a lot of times it's like early rock and roll because it's so like hacky, you know what I mean? Like a G and a C or whatever, and then whatever you can make, or single note things like what's one that like The Ventures, Walk Don't Run. Like that's not our era or anybody's era, much, much older, but like surf rock, stuff like that. I'm like, oh, it's single note things. It's a scale effectively. you know? So that was kind of that was like the first thing that I did in that regard with a borrowed guitar. And then eventually my uncle played bass and has played bass forever. I thought he was cool. He had extra basses, multiple instruments. But I ended up getting I can't remember if I bought one or if I got one for a gift. I think I bought the first one I had, like super, like Yamaha cheap bass. Anyway, and then learned a lot of songs from that, and that was where my ear training really helped me, was that I could listen to like, I could listen to a Cure record and, or a Cure CD to be more specific at the, in the era, like, and play through it, play bass lines. And that was that somehow at some point, I mean, I don't know that there was a distinct, clear time that I realized I was writing things, but I enjoyed making things up and just messing around, And I played with a couple different friends early on, I think primarily guitar. And I can't even believe I was playing with people, given how bad I was. But just out of the joy, just like, grade school friends that you like. There's no judgment. You know what I mean? Or if there is, you're keeping it to yourself. Everybody's bad. We're all equally bad. So there's a lot of equity there in that regard. Right. And then eventually I was doing bands with like playing bass. And I played bass in a couple of different early things, just playing bass where I wasn't singing. And then I don't even remember how I ended up singing in something. I think somebody just knew that I could sing or thought I could, or you know what I mean? I mean, it's possible that I suggested it. I highly doubt it, but,
Yeah. Because your mom was a music teacher, were you like have to do like choir in school and whatnot? And so you had any vocal training or?
Yeah. I mean, I did no like formal vocal training,
whatever.
I think years later after I'd done like 6 and 7 stuff, my mom was like, I'm paying you for this online vocal lesson with this guy because I can't handle listening to like, everything or you're not singing from your diaphragm or whatever it is.
Yeah.
All these little things, but no, like no vocal training, like middle school choir thing, like as an elective, but never like as a thing. The only thing I did performance wise, actually prior to that, was I did what am I trying to think of here? Youth Philharmonic. So I played violin in the Youth Philharmonic, and we actually, part of the requirements for those was it was like 2 or 3 concerts annually. So we played. This should give you some context of how small Portland is. So we played. They had some deal with they call it the Keller. I think, is it called Keller Auditorium? It's anyway. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's effectively where it's like downtown on Broadway. It's where you'll get huge people that come through there and like play. But we would play our stupid violin, like symphony concerts there, youth symphony thing. So it's just at the time they weren't booking it all the time. And so we get in there and play, and it's a pretty decent sized audience, and they, the curtain opens up and you're sitting stage side, adjacent, and it was cool. But I don't think I didn't think of that as performing the same way. You know what I mean? Gotcha. It wasn't like, I wasn't particularly nervous, and I wasn't particularly like psyched to do it. I was maybe indifferent, Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. But that was early days.
Yeah. What takes you from Portland to the East Coast? A family move or college or?
No, not at all. I knew Will from early college, from like a semester together we had.
Okay.
And then I continued there in Southern Oregon, and he moved back to the East Coast and was going to UMass, I believe.
Okay.
Anyway, point being, he was there. And we ended up playing together in that short amount of time. I knew his sister through somebody else, so then I met him, and just a weird thing where we bonded.
Yeah.
It's just like it's serendipitous timing. That's really all it was. It was just, and I loved him as a human then and now still. He's just a really good dude. And I think that for everything that I lack, like musically, like one of my fairly strong suits, if I had one, like, that I can sort of articulate, would be that I can suss out if there's chemistry or if like, I think somebody's got something pretty quickly, and for whatever reason, I was like, this guy likes all the right stuff. He's a big human being. He's just a big teddy bear of a human being. And so when he hits the drums, it's freaking hard every time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he's got pocket. And it's just interesting to like, and then he had some, like, the poles of what he liked were wide enough for my, brain at the time to like think, oh, this is neat. This is cool.
Yeah.
He liked all the modern English and all of the, all of that sort of like, Tears for Fears, any of that sort of stuff, Depeche Mode. I mean, I think of those bands differently now, but I'm just lumping a bunch together. Yeah. And then he also was super into like indie rock and like Matthew stuff. And he was the person, I've mentioned this a million times, but this band Bitch Magnet, he was the first person I knew that knew this band. And then, he knew like Slint and some of those other bands, and I knew them less well, but I knew of them. Yeah. I think I discovered Discord stuff before that stuff, but it's all adjacent. And so anyway, we had a lot to talk about. We enjoyed playing together. He's just a funny guy and just the easiest person to be around. So, so I moved there naively. So what had happened is I stopped going to college where I was going to college, and then I started going to college in Portland, closer to home. I was playing music because I decided, I think at some point, like, this is going to be what I do. And I had joined another band where everybody was about 8 to 10 years older, but we were playing. I was playing out fairly consistently, not necessarily well, but out in public. And then we did a pretty good job of getting a little bit of momentum going. The guitar player had played in some Portland bands that older punks knew more, and I didn't figure out till later, like, oh, he was in this band. That makes sense now. And I kind of drew the through line that I was unable to connect then. But we were supposed to put a 7-inch out on this label called Tim Kerr, which was a local label that put out like Dandy Warhols and Wipers reissues, and they did a Kurt Cobain and William S. Burroughs thing and all this cool stuff at the time. And then they also put out Everclear, and Everclear was the band that effectively bankrupted the label because they had a deal. They had some sort of deal before the Capitol deal happened, where Capitol was going to force them to. They had a deal with the local label that we were supposed to be on, Tim Kerr, but whatever they still owed to the label wanted to trickle out, right? They wanted it. Now Everclear had some momentum, so they wanted to go, okay, your EP is going to come out here, and then 6 months later, but they contractually got somebody to force them to put it all out, like to record it really fast and put it all out so they could jump to Capitol.
Oh,
so that process just drained the resources of the label at the time. And to not put it all off on Everclear, and I said this recently too, the cocaine habit of the owner who's since passed was so that was like a multi-tiered. Anyway, so it was just one of those things, I think, where I finally felt some momentum. I finally felt like I wanted to do this, and I had real natural chemistry with Will. And so I moved me and my best friend, I was like, I'm going to move to the East Coast. And he's like, I'll go with you. And so he quit his job, and we drove in his Subaru like as fast as we could. I think it was like 4 days across the US, or 4.5 days. Like, we only stopped once in New Orleans, like stopped like to spend the night. Yeah. Every other thing was just like terribly unsafe. Like, I would drive till I couldn't drive anymore, and then he would drive, and we'd sleep in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
And that was the great Oregon Trail trek to 6 Going on 7's inception.
That's awesome. Yeah. When 6 Going on 7 is getting started and you're starting to write, are there things you are inherently drawn to musically that you're trying to emulate or sound like? Because that first record to me really sounds a lot like early Jawbreaker, but like bass heavy. Like, there's something about your sound, especially the first 2 records, where it's like they're bass driven, where a lot of music of that era is not.
Yes, definitely the bass driven thing. We the trio thing we really liked, and so the way that James and I would play off of each other ended up, and I also would write a lot of things. I'll write some stuff on guitar, like, I was much better by then. I was happy, but I could play enough to kind of go, here's the chord progression, and then he would just take it and morph it and twist it and make it his own, and so much better. But I had so I would start there, and then other things would start with just me playing like bass chords, which was the thing that I really liked, that a lot of the people that at the time, I mean, like, in retrospect, there were people like Morphine that were doing that sort of thing, but I didn't really know Morphine when I moved there. I was much more influenced by the Northwest bands that I was seeing in Portland before I'd moved. Anyway, so there was that, and the vocal thing is funny because I've said this again, but like, the second record really encapsulates what we sounded like more consistently, than the first record does. The reason my voice sounds that way on that first record, so much so, like, I can point you to stuff I did prior to that it's even more shredded. You know what I mean? Just like, where all I wanted to do was like, emulate the people that I thought, like, I don't know how to do that, but and was probably doing it wrong and just wrecking the voice in the process. But between trying to sing correctly because my mom's cracking the whip with the diaphragm and shredding my voice, we had that first record, and that's really just a result of when Brian was recording us and we were in New Jersey for that first record. The label had gotten a deal, and we were in this basement studio of this guy's house, and the tape machine kept breaking, so they'd have to have it serviced. And so my vocal time to track vocals for that record just kept getting bumped and bumped and bumped. And I did all the vocals like in one. I think we'd maybe gotten one song done, and I did like the other 9 or whatever it was, like in short order. So my voice was shot, like so much so that I had to get this this thing called Performer's Secret, which was this throat spray that the guy who owned the house had in his garage in like the road case. So the funny like hair metal story of this is Walter Schreifels from Quicksand and Gorilla Biscuits and Rival Schools and all that stuff. He was 1/3 of the label that we were on at the time. and they somehow Skid Row, the later formation of it, not the original, Skid Row and Quicksand shared some sort of like middle management connection thing. There was some management thing. So that record was recorded at Dave the Snake Sabo's basement. So the guitar player from Skid Row's house. So we stayed in his basement. Like I literally slept in a sleeping bag under the board.
Oh, Jesus.
There's pictures from that sort of stuff. And we were told we couldn't go upstairs. That's Dave's house. It's a private residence. You guys don't go, use the bathroom down here, et cetera, et cetera. And then he came down like day two, I think, about, and then really hit it off with James and Will. And then he would pop in and like listen to everything and whatever. So all of that was a surreal experience. Cause of course I knew like the video era of that band. And it's like, it's so funny. Like, and it was long since past that, but it was cool to know, it was just like, oh, and this guy's pretty cool, but he was such like a metal dude, like, I like it, and then he took James and Will out when I was tracking vocals. He took them out to like shoot pool and drink beer and stuff out and wherever they were. Sayreville, New Jersey. That's where it was. That's where it was. Anyway. But yeah, that's why I was able to use Sebastian Bach's throat spray is what that was in his road case that he'd abandoned when he quit the band, or they fired him. Anyway,
that's great. Yeah, you guys do the 2 records with some American or Won't comes out on Doghouse. That record feels such a sonic departure from the first 2. Did that just come from working with a different producer, or was that a response to maybe, I don't know if there's like you guys were starting to get pigeonholed in an emo thing or trying to break free from that?
No, I mean, it's a weird thing because I think that record would have been a different record. The most like forthcoming answer is there was some push-pull tension in the band in terms of like working with the same people and not working with the same people and this and that. And I really, at the time, really wanted to continue with Brian because he was a friend, and James was really into the idea, not anti-Brian, but wanted to do something else, like work with somebody else. So somehow we wound up with Tim O'Hare, who had done a bunch of stuff, and I think really we had a lot of, like for us, a lot of money and a lot of time, and there are demos of that stuff, both stuff that Brian recorded, like one weekend, Good on Paper's a demo, and Readying, the first track, that are just much more in line and cohesive with like the second record. Like they make sense as like I think there's a lot of production things on that make it feel different than the songs felt live. That's the best way I can explain it. And I still really like the song, like Famous for It on there, Good on Paper, Americant, that song. There's a lot of, they're very symbiotic in some ways with like stuff that was on Heartbreak, if you think of them production wise differently, but they're produced totally differently. They're produced much more like, anyway. And again, like, there was a lot of tension in terms of like James was really considering going back to school, doing all these things. So it wasn't the record that we had made where we were all just like the Three Musketeers, like in the mix. And yet like all these things, like this is the irony of these things, is it coincided with the most money and opportunity we'd ever had, which is it's a terrible cocktail. You know what I mean? Because it's not like there's like, you're everybody's torn because they're like, oh shit, like we're getting offered to go like open for the Goo Goo Dolls or whatever, which was actually one of the last things that happened to us, was like that was a series of shows, like and of course, we're still snarky, like whatever, like the Goo Goo Dolls, like whatever, but it's the Goo Goo Dolls. It's still like I know we're going to play in front of however many 20,000 people or whatever. So but I think about those things now and I'm like, man, those things are just like, they're just not meant to, things that are not meant to happen just don't happen, it's fun. Like you wind up where you're supposed to wind up. And I was a little like freaked out. Like, what am I going to do next? And the band had temporarily sort of like ended, or I didn't know what was happening, but I don't think I was like bitter. I think that came later. No, no. I was ticked off because I didn't know, because I'm a big why. I wanted to know why, and there really was no why at the time. Yeah. It was just like other people. It wasn't, you internalize everything. We spent so much time together. We were like brothers, and it's like your brother dies, or your brother just like walks off and it says, I'm going to the store, and never comes back, because he literally got out of the van wherever it was and was like, I'll talk to you guys soon. And then I didn't talk to him for years, but Will did. Will would run into him but I was back. I had moved. I eventually moved out of town. And so that's, so I didn't have the opportunity, but that was the long-winded answer to the production on the third record. Anyway.
A respectable second, but the memory's different. And I'd rather forget feeling around for that home. Midas do the touch I told on her back in her bed, smiling at the ceiling. 5 years ago in a picture, smile satisfied forever.
Let's jump ahead in time. How do you guys end up in contact with Casey and Iodine for Self-Made Mess and re-releasing that?
I don't remember if it was Joe or Casey that reached out, but there was somebody. I don't know. It was. I honestly, again, it hasn't been that long, but it was one of those things where it came in conjunction with other things, like Brian McTernan and Sammy Siegler and myself did this thing in the same era as Heartbreak got Backbeat. In fact, it's in the same studio, which was a studio in Gloucester, Massachusetts, like the home of Gorton's fish sticks. So we did a record. We did Heartbreak's Got Backbeat there, and then Brian and I were roommates and did this thing that ended up being called Forgive, Forget. They got put out a couple of years ago on GGT Records in Seattle. That was supposed to come out on Revelation. Like this is like one of those things, but all of those things kind of came to pass in about a year period. Casey or Joe or both of them, we were in contact, and I loved the idea of that stuff being out again. I had been, for as like music lover-y as Walter and Sammy and Matt are, it seemed like a big miss to just let all that catalog just kind of, but it's financial, you know what I mean? Right, and I don't know all the ins and outs. And all I knew is I just thought, like, don't come back at me and tell me like I don't have the right to do this, which was not the case at all. It was actually all of it worked out great. But, and then, Iodine's kind of an interesting label to me at this point. They've got, they are very, very heavy on the cataloging a scene kind of, almost like to New England in an era, what Discord is to DC, Virginia, Baltimore, you know what I mean? Like all of that stuff. So it's funny. But it worked out good, and I really liked the reimagining of the kind of like conceptual idea of the aesthetics of the first couple records, but like the repurposing, because a lot of those things are done on shoestring budgets, and you're getting as close as you can to this. So this is a lot more. There's more money involved in when it's just packaging, and you just the recording's done. You've got everything. So I'm real happy with the way they look, the way they sound. It's great. It's nice to have that stuff out again. For me. Yeah.
Was the plan always to do both of those first two records, or was it just, we'll see how the first one does, and if it does X well, then we'll get around to the second one?
I think it was just to make sure to put them out in the world again, to put them up digitally online. I think the denominations like that might have been where we were, it literally says it like in the bio, like we were a band's band. We have a lot of bands that will say, oh, we love this record, I love this, but it doesn't always translate to like big sales, big numbers. We were never at our height, like when we were doing well for ourselves, or what I perceive as well for ourselves, we could sell out like Downstairs Middle East in Boston, which is probably, 500 people, something like that. But we preferred to play Upstairs, which was like 200 people, and that felt more like our vibe. So again, it's just what it is. It's cool as a document, and it sits nicely with a lot of that stuff from around that time. we were an early Hydra Head band. Our very first thing was on Hydra Head. So we've got Hydra Head connection. We've got Big Wheel connection because we were on a compilation before that 7-inch came out. And then Some, and then Big Wheel, which just takes it totally out of, or not Big Wheel, but a Doghouse, which takes it totally out of the thing. It's just cool to have it out. And I've continued on in music, and I've done a bunch of other things to various degrees of, not really success, but just like I've kept going. I had like a little gap when 6 Going on 7 ended, and in my period of mourning, whether intentional or inadvertently, as I call it. But since then, it's been pretty like, different things. Yeah. And so it's just nice to have that sit with everything else. You want to reference stuff and be like, look at this. I did this forever ago,
Yeah.
So
yeah. With the records being out and probably a renewed interest in the band, has there ever been any talk of like, hey, we could do a weekender here or there?
So we've been, like earlier on, we were offered like weird stuff, like God offered, the band had been defunct for however long, 5 years, 10 years or whatever. And somebody's like, come to Japan, and much, much more so with the advent of, not the advent of, but like how immersed in social media we are, the contact, like, the degrees of Kevin Bacon are like less and less.
Yeah. Right.
And so that has been a good, connection point. But my thing with those guys, so when James and Will and I reconnected, it just felt like we just kind of like, we ate a lot of Mexican food and talked about like what we, our vision of how we perceived the band then, now, and like what it meant, what was special. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I think is funny is like you were talking about like the sound between the second and third record and stuff. The one thing I can say is that we passed on a bunch of things that would have been like the sellout things. We passed on a bunch of things that would have been like the obvious, who knows what would have happened, but we didn't do them, we did our own thing. So for everything that those records aren't there, we kept it about like songs.
Yeah.
I think the production is spotty on some of those things relative to others, like it's better on some records than others, the later record is fine. It's just like, it's kind of anemic relative to other things. I think some of the songs are great, and live you can hear those songs. I've got like board tapes from like, North Carolina and Florida and, wherever, and they sound great. You're like, those are good songs. They make perfect sense in that like trifecta.
Yeah.
But recorded, you don't get that same sense. We tried some things, and we had a bunch of time to like come back to it and go like, I don't know, and like it's tough.
Yeah,
I do much better like trusting the process and like getting in and kind of going and and compartmentalizing it in terms of like shows and everything. So James, Will played drums on my last solo record, so it's the first record he's played drums on. So, but we've played over the years. I've actually used him as a live drummer playing solo shows too. Mm-hmm. So it was my 5th solo record. He had been in contact with James. James and I had been in contact for the first time in forever, like emailing back and laughing about stuff. And we talked on the phone. And anyway, I had like these couple songs. I was like, do you want to just come in? Will's already playing drums on all this stuff. You want to just come in and play some guitar on a couple of these songs? So he did, and I was like, oh man. And I said to him at the time, while Will and he were in the kind of like the lobby of the studio, I just said, we got to make another record, or we got to make some more music, because I was like, what has, outside of time, which has elapsed, the time, the whatever the time to conquer, or whatever the adage is, outside of that, it's nothing has really, like, the way that we play together just kind of exists in this vacuum from all of the hours we spent, because we socially, awkward, 3 socially awkward people in different ways that complement each other's relative social awkwardness.
Yeah.
So we spent so much time woodshedding and playing for the joy of, because we wanted to be a kick-ass live band, because that really was a thing. We were like, we want to, we collectively ego, we want to like blow these other bands away, or we want to be real good, whatever the thinking was at that time. Yeah. That was where that came in, but also creatively, because we always would we'd stumble upon stuff, just hours and hours of doing stuff. And I always had new ideas, James, we'd play on things, play things forever and then be like, I don't, and then we'd do things where we'd write a song in a practice and play it live at the next show and never play it again. And I think about some of that shit and I'm like, oh man, I wish I had board tapes from all of those, because there's literal like songs we finished with lyrics and everything that are just like in the ether.
One and done. Yeah.
One and done. So yeah, that was the motivation for that. And then we recorded a couple songs on our with my friend Adam Taylor, who's a great engineer. He was Paul Coldery's right-hand man as an intern. So Paul Coldery did like early Radiohead. He did some Weezer B-sides. He did some Pixie stuff, Lemonheads. What else? A lot of stuff. Hole, Live Through This. I mean, he's doing like some big stuff. And Adam learned from him, was doing all this stuff. And Adam's recorded all of my solo records except for one, which was a pandemic record, because of everything, right? So I was here local for that one. But he recorded a couple 607 songs. The first ones we'd done forever. And we were just going to put out a 7-inch by ourselves. Like that was our like motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But instead we just kind of were like, like what should we do? Should we keep going? So we've kept going kind of. And like, that's kind of where we're at now with it.
Yeah.
We have plans for the new year, but that's all we're talking about, right?
That's a secret.
We don't have any like show, we don't have any show, like touring things, but we have offers, and we're just kind of, what am I trying to say? My stipulation was always that we create again if we're going to do something, because I really have a hard time, and I don't judge the bands that do this. That's the thing that I want to clarify with. I have a hard time myself thinking like, I don't like the idea of like the Mortgage Core tour where we go out and like play Heartbreak's Got Backbeat, over and over again until people are like, enough already.
You're not there for nostalgia, right?
Well, I'm fine with that. I'm fine. I have to acknowledge what those, that era is a great era, and I enjoy that stuff, but not independent of making stuff. Yeah. Because making stuff up was the fun of it for us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And the way the record industry has changed since the band's first time around, it's much easier to just write, record, and release music without the huge financial pressure of like having to recoup so much like you used to have to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, completely.
It's great.
Yeah. I've got a snapshot of a time almost forgot. Years from memory, lost like a BT. This Heartbreak's Got Backbeat, so I can keep walking.
Support a cool label doing cool stuff, and not just us, but plenty of really cool. They've got some great great new bands. I really like No Man that they've got going on, and which I think is like a kind of a DC area band, isn't it? Yeah, and then they've got some great New England stuff going on, reissues, and I think they've got a ton of stuff on the horizon. And then otherwise, 609.7.com. If you want to go there, joshuaenglishmusic.com, either of those ones, those are all like mailing list things. The 609.7 one specifically, sign the mailing list, because the internet is, or the social media space is just rented. We're just there, you never know when that stuff's going to go away.
Yep.
And that's how we're going to kind of parcel out information as it comes to pass.
Hey, yeah.